Well, Arctur was an early British title, and it's been speculated that the reason that there is very little evidence of a King Arthur was that Arthur was based on a warlord, and warlords were called Arcturs. So that the real King Arthur may not have been ever known as Arthur in his lifetime, but was an Arctur, which means bear, which means ferocious, a warlord. And so that's how I worked that one in. There's the whole Merlin is seen as a crazy old nut, not really a sorcerer. Arthur's genesis, we know from there's what's called the Vulgate cycle and the post-Vulgate cycle. Thomas Malory and the stuff that came after Thomas Malory, La Morte d'Arthur is the central book in the Arthurian myths, although it goes back to some people. I think it might have been the Venerable Bede and some other people who wrote about Arthur long before. And then on to later things like Alfred Lord Tennyson's the poems Idylls of the King, and then to modern people like Marion Zimmer Bradley and T.H. White's versions of the myth. But
what do you think of John Steinbeck's book on Arthur?
I read it years ago. It's a minor thing. I don't recall much of it. It's just a minor thing. It's not.
Oh, that one.
Same thing with Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court. It's a funny little piece, but it's a satire basically, by Mark Twain.
One thing before you go on to the main narrative of Destiny and Perplex, I will say you mentioned to me in a personal conversation where you were saying how you slipped in Tennyson and Stevens naturally throughout the course of the book. But I thought that the best reference was actually 2001, where at the end Merlin knocks over I think a flower pot, and the flower falls down, and then it spotlights on the flower pot, and it means death. And that's an interesting reference to 2001, where he knocks over the glass, towards the end, right before he ascends to the Star Child.
Oh, I never thought of that. See, that you just read something into it that I didn't intend.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's good. I mean, it may very well be, because my mind might have picked up on that. This is what we talked about just a few minutes ago with the novel, is that references come in and out. I will always acknowledge something that I'm definitely pilfering from someone else, but there's going to be things that work their way in. I mean, I've just read too much in any given month from looking on Project Gutenberg or whatnot and reading old books or old tracts or treatises. But anyway, to get back to this play, so I wanted to deconstruct the Arthurian myth. For example, we find out why Excalibur is called Excalibur, because the sword that Arthur has, called Excalibur, the magical sword, is sometimes called Caliburn. So what I made was that Arthur doesn't pull the sword out of the stone, whether it's Excalibur or another sword. Is in some versions it's one or the other, but he pulls the sword out of a Saxon warrior that Arthur has killed in the final battle, called Caliburn. So the warrior's named Caliburn. So Excalibur means X out of Caliburn. So that's how it gets its name. So I give a plausible explanation of the beginning of Excalibur, and we learn a little bit about Queen Guinevere. We learn about his two sisters, Morgause and Morgan Le Fay, both having red hair, and we assume they're his sisters. We don't know. I don't know yet. Maybe I'll make them bullshitters. But we know that Morgause is pregnant with Modred, so we know that Modred is not the son of Arthur in my version of the thing, and he's going to come back in the end. The final play is the fall of Camelot. But one of the things I used a real life myth, and I think I mentioned this before when we've talked over the last 4 or 5 years or whatnot. There's a myth about green children that came out of a cave called the Children of Woolpit, the Green Children of Woolpit, and there are various versions of this myth. The Woolpit story, I think, is set in Wales. There are tales of it set in Spain, Italy, France, and a few other European countries, about these kids that came out of a cave. They were greenish looking, had green eyes. And this is similar to what I had when I drowned in a lake in New Hampshire. I had this dream long before I heard of this. So it's an archetypal thing, sort of like the gray aliens with bug eyes, modern UFO myth. And I said to myself, well, what if Arthur was one of these kids who was wandering around and claimed to have come from a twilight land like the Green Kids did. And instead of having just a brother and a sister, out of here supposedly came Demodwine or Arthur, and Morgan Le Fay and Morgause, his older sister and his younger sister. And what if, like with because Sir Lancelot, when he was young, Lancelot was his original name was Galahad, which is the name of his son who completes the Grail quest, which will be my fourth play. What if Arthur also was actually named Modred? Because if you have Morgan and Morgause, why not have a name for Arthur that starts with an M-O? So his name, supposedly in this version, in this other Twilight Land, would have been Modred. And then we know Morgause names her baby Modred. And we find out about Sir Gawain, and Sir Gawain is just about to go on to his adventure detailed in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. We find out about a knight called Sir Azrael, the Destroyer, which is based upon the angel of death, Azrael. We find out about the coming of Lancelot and Tristram, which will be in the third play with Queen Guinevere and whatnot. So this play is setting up a lot of the Arthurian myth, but in a much more believable fashion. My goal in going with these plays was doing Cassavetes and Camelot.